France, 1316. The air in Paris was thick with the rot of rain and ash. The Seine whispered quietly past the dark walls of the Louvre, not yet a palace of paintings, but a fortress of silence and smoke. It was an age when kings ruled not by wisdom, but by fear dressed in velvet. And it was in this shadow, on a night soaked in thunder, that a young queen was forced to do what no living woman should ever endure, to lie beside the dead, as if love could be conjured from cold flesh. Her name was Clemence of Hungary, and her womb, not her heart, would decide the fate of a nation. They called her beautiful, with pale golden hair and eyes that held the sadness of distant winters. She had been wed to King Louis Tinks only months before his sudden, violent death. Some said poison, others whispered divine punishment. He collapsed after a game of jeu de paume, clutching his chest, eyes rolled back, a thin trail of blood staining his lip like a final kiss from fate. At 26, France was left with no king, no clear heir, and a queen 3 months pregnant who had barely learned to say bonjour without trembling. The problem was not grief. France had never cared for grief. The problem was time. The unborn child, if male, could become king. If not, power would pass to Louis's brother, Philippe the Tall, a man whose ambition was as sharp as his dagger. But the people remembered too well the War of Succession in Navarre, and the fear of civil war hung like smoke in every hearth. A decision had to be made. But how does one decide a crown's future when it still floats inside a woman's belly? And so began the Vigil of the Dead. Clemence, veiled in black and draped in gold-threaded silence, was locked inside the royal apartments with the king's body. For weeks. The reason? To prove beyond question that the child in her womb was his, that no lover's hands had touched her after his death, that the blood of France would not be tainted by suspicion. And if there was any doubt, if a single noble raised an eyebrow, she and the unborn would be cast aside like broken goblets after a feast. The body of Louis was embalmed, but poorly. The heat of June crept into the walls, and the stench of rot became impossible to hide. Clemence, noble, obedient, terrified, was given oils to burn, cloth to wrap her face, prayers to repeat. But none of it could silence the groaning of a corpse swollen with decay. The guards outside the chamber were instructed not to speak. The priests were told to record nothing. And still, stories leaked like blood through a shroud. It was said that Clemence wept so long, her eyes ceased to produce tears, that she would speak to the corpse at night, asking if he forgave her, though she had done nothing but survive. That one morning, the maid who brought her food fainted upon opening the door, because the queen was found lying beside the body, face turned to his chest, as if listening for a heartbeat that no longer answered. Some believe she had gone mad. Others say she was ordered to sleep beside him, that the midwives demanded it, that the court needed to see no man entered the chamber. But those who knew her, those few who saw her before she entered, said it was not madness that overtook her. It was something colder, something quieter, a kind of submission that grows only in the presence of power so absolute. It makes death look like mercy. And still the child had not come. Time, like breath, grew thin. Within the walls of the Louvre, the world narrowed to candlelight and murmurs behind stone. Outside, the court stirred like a restless animal, waiting. Waiting not for the queen's grief to pass, but for her body to produce an answer. Would it be a prince or a princess? Would France be given a future or handed to Philippe the Tall, who already moved as if the throne were a seat warming for his arrival? The nobles began to wager in whispers. The merchants sent fewer carts to the palace. Even the priests, who should have prayed for life, began composing sermons for a coronation that had not yet occurred. And in the center of it all, Clemence, like a widow before the body of her empire, lay beneath tapestries that could not keep out the scent of death. Each day began the same: a bowl of warm milk, a psalm recited to the Virgin, a silent walk around the edges of the chamber, where she no longer stepped on the same tile twice. The body of Louis had grown waxen, sunken, crumbling beneath its linen. The oils had failed. The embalmers had failed. France, it seemed, had failed. But Clemence had not yet. She remained in that room, untouched, watched by guards who stood not to protect her, but to record that none had touched her. She had become less woman, more vessel, an ark carrying either salvation or irrelevance. They did not let her speak with her ladies. They did not let her write letters. Every word was a risk, every name a threat. And so she turned inward, speaking only to the dead. Whether aloud or in silence, none could say. But when the maid was finally permitted to return, escorted by 2 priests, she found strange things. A rosary tied in knots, a circle of burned herbs near the fireplace, a small carving of Saint Denis placed under the bed, upside down. These were not acts of devotion. These were acts of desperation, of a woman praying not for comfort, but for power. It was then the nightmares began. The guards, trained to remain still, reported strange mutterings at night, the sound of pacing long after the queen had retired. On one occasion, a scream, quick and sharp, like a knife slipped into a heart already wounded. The royal physician, summoned in secrecy, found Clemence sitting in a chair near the corpse, eyes bloodshot, hands trembling. She would not rise. She said only this: "He will not let me leave until he sees the child born." And then she laughed, not a madwoman's cackle, nor a widow's sob. It was a sound so flat, so thin, it seemed the chamber had lost all air. Whispers spread like plague, that the queen had lain with more than a corpse, that something else watched her now from within the stone, that this was no longer a vigil of mourning, but a ritual of binding. The body of Louis, some said, had begun to change shape, that its fingers curled one night, reaching toward her, that its mouth opened in the dark. Nonsense, of course. But in a court ruled by bloodlines and shadows, truth was not the currency, fear was. And yet, the child still had not come. The queen, once golden and radiant, now looked like a painting left in rain. Her skin pale, her limbs thinner, her stomach small and hard like marble carved too early. The midwives worried, not aloud, of course, but in glances, in hesitant touches, in prayers said 3 times instead of 2. If the child died within her, what would become of her? Of France? Would Philippe strike that very night? Would she be thrown from court, sent back to Hungary with nothing but silence and shame? The answer, it seemed, would come not from God, nor doctor, nor prayer, but from within the stillness, beneath the veil of death that hung over her every breath. And then on a night when thunder clawed at the rooftops of Paris and the bells of Saint-Denis tolled without cause, the queen's water broke. No announcement was made. No trumpets, no bells, no heralds galloping into the countryside to shout of royal birth. Only the dull scuffle of slippers against stone, the rustling of linen, and the quiet gasp of a woman who had not spoken her own name in weeks. Clemence was taken from the chamber at last, not through the main doors, but a servant's passage once used by laundresses. The body of King Louis remained behind, shrouded in sour linens, his presence no longer necessary. What had been required of him was done. The rest would be up to fate. The birthing chamber was warm and dark, lined with tapestries depicting the nativity and the flight into Egypt. But none of those holy images seemed to soothe the queen. She asked for no prayers. She gripped the hand of a midwife and said only one thing: "If it is a girl, do not let them tell me." The midwives exchanged glances but nodded. They had seen what happened to women who gave birth to daughters when kingdoms demanded sons. They had watched queens disappear. They had heard what happened to stillborns wrapped in velvet and buried before morning. The silence around power was always deeper than death. Labor took hours. Some said it was 12. Others said 3. But for Clemence, it was eternal. Every breath was a reckoning. Every pain, a blade. They say the child did not cry at first, that he came into the world silent, covered in blood that was not all his own. That the queen, seeing his face, whispered something no one could hear, and then fainted into sleep like a candle guttering at last. But the boy lived. A prince, a king. Jean Urs, King of France, born November 15th, 1316. And for 5 days, France had a monarch no older than a dream. The court erupted in uneasy celebration. Nobles wept in public. Tapestries were hung. Coins were minted with the newborn's name. And Philippe the Tall, who had already moved his belongings into the upper chambers, was made to bow before an infant swaddled in ermine. But behind the cheers was a silence too loud to ignore. Everyone knew what could come. Newborns were fragile, especially those born of grief and rot. And so every hour, a priest was stationed at the cradle, a physician on watch. The queen, still weak, was not permitted to hold him for more than minutes at a time. He was not her son. He was France's. On the 5th night, the cradle fell silent. No cry, no rustle, only the cold hush of a room that had already known too much death. The nurse, upon finding the boy lifeless, did not scream. She did not even speak. She simply folded the cloth over his face and sat beside him, waiting for someone braver to enter. Rumors say she saw something near the cradle, a shape, tall and cloaked, whispering into the boy's ear just before he stilled. But others claim she said nothing at all, because some stories are too dangerous to tell, even if true. Jean I was declared dead before dawn. The cause was never named. No illness had been seen. No fever, no bruising, no blood. Just silence. France went from kingless to crowned to kingless again in less than a week. The cradle was burned. The tapestries torn down. Philippe the Tall, now unchallenged, was crowned within a month. He did not mention the boy in his speech. He did not look at the queen. Clemence did not speak at the funeral. She walked behind the tiny white coffin like a ghost returned to its grave. Some say she wept so hard her skin cracked. Others say she simply stared ahead, eyes empty, hands clasped in prayer that no longer reached any god. But everyone agreed on one thing. She did not sit during the burial. She stood the entire time, unblinking, unshaking like stone, like one who had seen the world die twice in the span of one womb. After the death of the infant king, the world around Clemence grew quieter than silence itself. Not the silence of prayer nor of mourning, but the thick, suffocating stillness of something unfinished. She did not scream. She did not accuse. She merely returned to her chambers where the walls still remembered the scent of embalmed flesh and the echo of a heartbeat that never was. Her ladies resumed their duties. The tapestries were rehung. The sheets were changed. But no one dared speak of the corpse, of the weeks she had spent lying beside it, of the dead man who had become more jailer than husband. Philippe the Tall was crowned without contest. He offered his sister-in-law a generous pension and a villa far from court. She did not attend the coronation. In fact, she never again stepped inside the royal chapel. Instead, she vanished into a rhythm of days that blurred together. Soft footfalls down stone corridors, long hours sitting beneath high windows, staring at something only she could see. They say she kept her child's blanket, unwashed, tucked beneath her pillow until the fabric began to disintegrate. That sometimes she whispered lullabies to the wind. That once, during Lent, a servant heard her praying not to God, but to Louis. What passed between them in that sealed room, no one will ever know. Whether she was ordered to remain, or chose to, or something deeper and more terrible tied her there, these things are lost to history. What remains are fragments. A letter she never sent, stained with a small blot of blood. A carving in the side of her bed. He waited for the child, but not for me. And the simple fact that after the birth and death of John I, Clemence of Hungary was never seen smiling again. She died 7 years later, alone. No attendants at her bedside. No ceremony, no monument. A queen, yes, but not one the poets sang for. Not one the painters chose to immortalize. Her tomb, plain and narrow, bore only her name. No dates, no title, just Clemence. As if even marble dared not speak what she endured. And yet, in hidden libraries and forgotten abbey corners, her story lingers, not in records, but in warnings. There is a tale told among the nuns of Avignon of a woman who bore a king and a curse in the same breath. They say she is sometimes heard weeping on nights when the fog comes in too thick, not for her husband, not even for her child, but for herself, for the part of her that was buried while she still breathed. France would move on. New kings, new wars, new brides dressed in silks they did not choose. But no queen since Clemence would ever be asked to sleep beside the dead. That horror, at least, was left in her wake, a silence carved so deep into the soul of the realm that even kings learned to fear what power demanded of the living. Because power, in its oldest form, does not ask, it takes. And sometimes it buries you before you die.